You are listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice.
Hello, welcome to the next INCJ Newsdesk session, and today for this session we're joined by, I'm not going to pronounce your names, I'm really sorry. I have trouble with English names and pronunciations, so but it's Sari and Anastasia, and I will get them to introduce themselves properly shortly. And you're based in Finland.
Yes.
Is that correct? Good. Okay. Who wants to go first? Give us a quick potted introduction of who you are, what you do, and how you got into what you're doing.
Well, we're from the same organization. I'm Anastasia, Lapintie, and Sari and I both work for what we in English would call the Finnish Foundation for Supporting Ex-Offenders. But we are basically a non-governmental organization that works to support people who are involved in different stages with the criminal justice system, as well as their family members. And at the moment, I work for our family work, let's say, unit of 3 people. Altogether, we have about 50 people at the moment working for us. And what we do is support the family members and loved ones of people who have a criminal justice background.
Yeah, and I'm Sari Lönnberg, and I work with women and in women-specific work as an expert. And we have a team of 4. Yeah, team of 4 employees right now, and we also have, as a member of our staff, expert by experience. So we give also some kind of peer support for our women customers, and we work in prisons and also after the release. Yeah, that's about it, I think.
So I suppose the obvious question is why is family support important?
I think the obvious answer is that when a person commits a crime, it affects a very large number of people. There is obviously a person who is sentenced for the crime and the victim or victims of the crime, but then you have the families of the victims, you have the families of the sentenced person, you would have friends, relatives, teachers, work colleagues, a whole number of people. You might have children that are in some ways affected by the crime and the punishment. And we tend to forget that it's not just about the offender and the victim. So there is a large amount of people who are in different ways affected and can be also considered as victims of the crime because of the ripple effects or the implications of what happens after a person is sentenced.
Yeah, and of course, I think among women, there is always the question about the motherhood and the maternity, the point of that. And I think it's really important to, as Anastasia said, that there is the number of people who gets affected by the crime is really, really large. And among women, the expectations towards motherhood are quite high. And then it's really something that you should consider and take notice when you work with women.
And actually, then when you think of the mother in prison or the woman in prison, there are expectations to her as well. So people might think that, how did you raise your child? Now she's committed this crime and has been sentenced to prison. So there are so many layers of this.
Is this does this fit with a traditional model of, if you like, penal approaches? So often you can see, certainly for the expectations about men and masculinity, is that do your time, take your punishment. There's a kind of, certainly maybe in slightly more conservative countries where punishment is regarded as more of a motivator for judicial sentencing. And it's characterized as a kind of there's a kind of suck it up approach, which goes against the grain. So where does this fit, and what's the history in Finland of this kind of model of looking at the wider ramifications of the impact of somebody who's committed a crime and those that it affects that are related to them?
You can start, Anastasia, if you want. It's a tough question.
It's a big question. But well, if I understand kind of where you're coming from, the point is that women are an anomaly when you talk about prisoners and people who've committed crimes. The social expectations towards women, and especially if you're a mother, are different to those of men. So women in prison are looked at through different criteria and stricter criteria than men.
And I think the norms that we set up in our society towards women are different towards if we look at men. And I think the basic is that if a man commits a crime, it's some kind of, people accept it like it's not that big of a deal. But when you put a woman in that situation, it changes everything. The stigma and the consequences that the woman will suffer and face are much wider than towards men. So I think there is like these kind of social regulations and the norms that women confront when they commit a crime and go to prison. So that is something we have to know and acknowledge when we work with the women there.
And then when you work with the family members as well, because the same thing applies, that they have to also consider that the woman in prison who is my daughter or partner or sister or whoever is looked at through this different lens or this different kind of norms than if it were my brother or my partner. Not to say that it's somehow nicer if a man is in prison, but there are these layers that we don't always understand that affect the women differently. And
of course,
and
the children of the
part of
prisoners. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is that part of the judicial? Sorry. Is that part of the judicial process? Or where you come from as an external agency, you have to provide additional support in that context rather than it being, because you can have two people, one male, one female, committing an identical crime, but there's a differential outcome and impact as to removing that person from society. Is that accounted for in the judicial system in Finland, or is that something that has to be compensated for in the kind of work that you do?
Well, over the recent years, I think, like in the past 5 years, in our, I think, what is the name of the, Anastasia, you have to help me. Prison and Probation Service of Finland. Yeah. That is our national service here in Finland. And what is it called? And I think in the past 5 years, they have really studied about the needs and the different impacts that women in prison have and the stigma and the needs they have to support them in prison. So I think there is a good base that, and the knowledge is we have more knowledge about the needs and the ways we have to support women in if they want to change their lives. And I think the situation here right now is that the officers and the guards have had some kind of women specific training, and trauma informed practice is known by them. But today we are in the situation that we know there are different needs among women prisoners, but the implementing this knowledge is just not like we are not ready. So we have the knowledge, but
Not
we
mainstream.
don't implement it yet. Yeah. But you can continue.
I just wanted to add that I agree that it's like it's an emerging trend, if one might say so, in the prison service. But then, if you go back to the sentencing process, for example, it's not recognized. There's no kind of gender lens in sentencing people.
Yeah, and I actually yesterday I was meeting the head of the women specific work in our in our prison and you say Anastasia, prison and probation service of Finland. Yeah. So I met the head of the women specific work and women prisoners head. So she told me that they have trained their staff for the past 2 years, and we have actually been also involved in the training process. But there are still some kind of this phenomenon they are facing, that some guards or officers decline to use these kind of approaches. They say that they don't want to face the prisoners in women-specific way or trauma-informed. They know that, yeah, it's fine, but we have done these things for the past 20 years like this, so we will continue doing it the same way. So there are some kind of attitudes they have to work on among their staff right now, and that's I think the key point we have to do.
And I think one part is always when you're providing support, like planning for a person to be released. If you're thinking about re-entry, what kind of support a person in prison needs, then there is a gendered perspective to that, because it's more likely for a man in prison to have women supporting him than for a woman in prison to have support on the outside. So the networks are different, the support system is different, gendered.
And so these attitudes, what's the process that is, I mean, the work that you do, it would be good to work through some examples, or an example that just illustrates how this operates in practice. But how do you get those people who are reluctant to adopt a trauma-informed approach or a gendered lens for this? How do you get them to the point where they connect with that, and it makes it easier for them to do their job because they can see a benefit, hopefully, that it lowers rates of reoffending. I would imagine that would be the metric that people would want to see. But what other metrics are there? What other indicators of the quality of this experience do you think would shift people's views on this?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know if I have the right answer, because yesterday when I was talking with the head of the women's specific work, that was this kind of, we say, hot potato. So what should we do next? And we do co-work and we just wondered about where they are coming from and why they want to like decline to use these kind of approaches that would really benefit them and make their job easier on day-to-day basis. But I think there is some kind of reluctance to like to really acknowledge that that women's needs are different. They think about it like from the equality point of view, that everything they do is like they give the same approach and give the same support, not gender based. Like they think that everyone should have the same treatment, and it's not something that that there are differences really between women and men. So I think there is some kind of reluctance to really see the differences between women and men prisoners. But these are just like my hypothesis, and like I don't really have any kind of studies or research to support my observations. But I think that's something we should really talk about here right now.
And I think that's
the
something
question
that,
about equality.
Yeah, and it's on all levels in society. It's not just about prisons, but this is my understanding is similar to yours. But I think that when you are talking about illustrating example, I was thinking that one is, for example, that you are working with somebody who has been to prison, who has her own history, and who now comes there as an employee, and the staff can see that actually change is possible. So that's kind of what you can keep on doing. That has an impact on the women, but it has to have an impact to the staff as well, because some of them would know her and know her history as well, but then see that, well, what a change has happened. Then, well, we have to do this awareness raising. It's just a part of it, takes time. But then one thing I think is important is trying to have dialogue with staff, and specifically with people who are prison officers, in the sense that they are in charge of security and not, for example, a social worker. So we've done some dialogue, awareness raising with them, specifically regarding to how to face children as visitors in prison and other family members. But this is kind of a part of it, that you, if when possible, engage with people and try to have a conversation, because if you're on opposite ends of the room, nobody wants to change their minds. But obviously this is something that takes a long time for any of us.
And we tend to personalize crime.
Yes.
As a say maybe in the Northern European cultures, there's an individualization of moral responsibility for crime, and therefore punishment and rehabilitation. But what you're suggesting is that we take a more holistic view of this, and that challenge of preparing people in that engagement with officers and professionals and support workers and people with lived experience. Just describe a bit about your experiences with, learning how that dynamic works, and what would you say were the characteristics of, as you say, it's an emerging thing and it's a snapshot and there's no formed thoughts about this at this point. But what's your gut telling you about how this process might work that you want to take forward into future work?
I think what Anastasia said earlier about the dialogue, that is really important, that we have the right environment and the space, and that we widen our perspective to and we have to be open to different kind of point of views and angles about certain matters. And I think that is something we really need to like discuss and plan how to like motivate people to listen and really to talk about these issues and make them see that there are really good benefits of changing the way you do your work and confront people. And I think it's really important to like the planning right now, how do we make the right environment and the space for the discussion and the dialogue. I really don't have the right answer, but it's something we really need to talk about. And I think there is some good researches and projects here in Finland also concerning our public services right now. So they are really interested to facilitate all the good practices we know that works with women, and so there are many kind of good developments here right now, but we are really on our way, right? So everything is like we really have the knowledge about the situation and what should we do. The question is how to implement everything we know.
It might be worth for a moment just explaining the context a little bit more. I realise we've got to a point where it's like, actually, you need to understand the difference. How do multi-agencies work in Finland when it comes to prison and probation? Is it here in the UK? We've drifted towards, we've kind of dismantled the role of local authorities within probation and offence management, where it's not really, they don't have budgets for that anymore. They don't have staff who people can leave prison and there's very narrow forms of support. What's the expectation within Finland about the way that multiple agencies work together or not, in order to be able to, create a pathway for somebody to come out and, integrate back into society again?
Well, the strategy of the prison and probation services is to have that multi-agency cooperation, because as they themselves say that they can't do it alone. They need partners to provide the services that people in prison do need during imprisonment, but also during re-entry, when you're building a network that helps people after they've completed the sentence. And most of the kind of targeted work for people, for offenders, or this sort of background is at the moment provided by a third sector, non-governmental organizations, which in the UK would mostly probably be called charities. But here many of us are government funded. And then in our legislation, the idea is that when a person is released, he or she is a citizen like anyone else and entitled to the same services as anyone else, which in practice can lead to the fact that you are not receiving the services that you need. And you might be facing difficulties in accessing services because of your background, but there's no kind of step to help you access services because of your background. You want to add, Sari?
Well, I think that's the point where we come and help them to get the services. So that's our role in all of the in our whole of the system. So we we can provide this kind of support for the person to access the right public services they need. So yeah.
And then provide the services that the public sector does not provide.
Yeah.
And what's the benefit of this? What have you seen in terms of what difference does it make? Does it achieve an overall benefit for society, or is it, and the individuals affected? And then, what about the people who are the victims within, of crime? What's the general tone? Often, it can become quite antagonistic, and the victims often can be feel as if they're shortchanged because the perpetrator is getting more support than the victim might. How is that balance achieved?
Well, we have support services for victims of crime, and I would claim that we have more support services for victims than the offenders. But I do see the point, and I fully understand that a victim of crime would feel that why am I not getting the support that I need or enough support. But then, the benefit is that when we help the person who has offended and might be in the risk of reoffending, we can stop the reoffending, but we can also help the family members of that person because, as I said, the ripple effects can be quite wide. So if you have, let's say you have a mother who is supporting her child in for decades maybe, who is misusing substances and committing crimes, and then she herself is maybe indebted in trying to help her, is carrying a secret, is not able to talk about the things that have happened, is not getting the support that she herself would need. That makes possibly her ability to work, it lessens her ability to work. So it means that while providing support, you're not receiving support, and you're kind of left without, and you might not able to be the same productive citizen as you have been before. So when we are providing support for the offender, we are also making sure that the family members are not solely responsible for supporting that person.
Yeah, it's the direct and the indirect victims.
Yes. Yes,
and women particularly are in a position where that has more impact indirectly on other people than maybe men do. What have you learned when you kind of interact with people from other countries, jurisdictions, departments? What do you learn from your observations of other practices in other parts of the criminal justice field or systems? Is the stuff that is this at the cutting edge of this approach, or is it something that is, kind of well understood in other places as well, and it's being carried with a rising tide, if you like? Or are you standing out and feeling that you're, kind of doing something which is not common to many people? How does it fit within that wider field?
Well, I think it depends on the country, because we have really good relations to UK, for example, and there are really good methods and studies and researches that has it has given us some kind of reassurance that we are doing the right things, because the phenomenon and the needs for women are universal. I think the problems women face, the traumas and the mental health issues, substance abuse, the role of women in society, they are it's something we share, and there are so much similarities, and I think we have a lot to learn about some practices and approaches, and I'm really excited of all the co-work we have done, and looking forward to the future, because there is really good to change thoughts, and the dialogue is always something that I, every time when I talk with a foreign colleague, I learn something, and the perspective is a bit different, and the methods they are using and the practice. So there is a lot we can learn, but also I think there is something someone can learn from us and the way we do things here. So it's like in both directions.
What about you, Anastasia?
Well, I can agree with what Sari is saying. What I I'm really hoping is that what we could have more here is the support for motherhood or mothering, including the mothers who have lost access or contact with their children, and like having parenting programs or these things. I always feel very envious when I hear from other countries, because they're so interesting and good projects going on. So that's kind of what I'm hoping that we could have here in Finland.
Yeah,
but then again, there's the context. Then there's the context of our criminal justice system that we also the threshold of going to prison is higher than in other countries. So it also means that the women, let's say in the UK, might be serving prison sentences for something that would be a community sentence in our country in some cases. So that's the kind of benefit that we have.
Yeah, we've got I suppose a recognition in this country now that the police are being used as a mental health crisis response, and you know, to the point where the Metropolitan Police in London are changing their policy about not responding to mental health issues because they're not being. It's not a policing issue; it's a public health issue. And the infrastructure has been shifted away from that kind of mental health support at an acute time of you know, economic challenge, if you like, and through the pandemic. And I suppose if you were gonna, you know, when you go to workshops and policy conferences and you're asked to speak, what's your, let's finish on what your message is to people. Like, what's your hopeful message that in taking an approach which is, as you say, co-produced, incorporates lived experience, looks at things holistically, seeks to appropriately punish, but not over. I don't know the right words, but not to, if you like, blame, but to look at the results of rehabilitation. You know, it's a very progressive kind of approach. What's your message to people to say, hold on to this idea, because, you know, it could easily slip backwards and go the opposite way? How do you keep people looking forward to the benefits of this kind of approach?
You want to start, Anastasia, or I need to think of a minute or two.
Okay. Okay, you can go ahead and think. Well, I think it's important to understand that shame does not rehabilitate. So when we punish and we shame and we want people to feel guilty about what they have done or what their partner or child or sister has done, it does not change anyone's behavior, but it makes them feel worse, diminished, and the kind of the bad effects are to multiple people, and not just the one who has committed the crime. So understanding that helping people who have offended helps other people as well. It helps to stop offending, but it helps the people who are connected to that person as well. And specifically when they have children. So if we continue to say that children are our future, we have to understand that how we treat their parents has a very big effect to what kind of children they grow up in and what kind of future they can have. And as we know that there are adverse childhood experiences of having a parent in prison, and there are a lot of accumulating risks to a child for having a parent in prison, but then the risks do not have to come true. But we need to understand that to support the children, we have to support their parents and other family members. And when the court has already punished, we don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah, and I think I want to talk about about how we think about when we think about women in prison, and I think it's really important to, like, when we talk as a professional to professional, we talk a lot like women are so difficult and it's so hard to discuss with them or help them or support them because they are so they are impatient and they don't want to hear. They are aggressive and they shout and they are loud and everything. But I think it's really important to understand where are they coming from to that meeting and why they behave like that and why they have emotional issues and it's hard for them to like adjust their emotions to some situations. So it's really important. I think it benefits the professional and the worker who is confronting these women if they really understand the situation the woman is coming to that meeting or appointment. So it helps. It like gives. I think it helps to the dialogue and the confrontation in that setup. So it's really important that people understand the backgrounds and the needs. Yeah.
And the anxiety that a person might be experiencing being in prison for different reasons. So that's also something. When I'm anxious and I go to a meeting, it probably shows.
Yeah.
So even just from a self-interested, pragmatic point of view, there's something in this for those reluctant people who don't want to see that bigger picture. From their own self-interest, this would just make your day a bit easier because you reducing confrontation because you're understanding the context within which people come from. So, okay, I think I've understood. You've explained it very well, and it'll be very interesting to see when we look at all the dialogues that we've had through the day, through the news desk, about how this fits with other expectations, because we've had a great response about people talking about mental health and cognitive diversity as kind of issues that need to be explored, and it is something which is being taken up across the world. So is there any final thoughts that you want to add? That have you got any points that you want to make? We'll put links and things into the blog description and stuff, so it'll be people can contact you if they want to follow up.
I think I'm always open for a discussion and dialogue. So, and learn about other people's practices and other countries. So if you have good methods or something, just contact us.
Oh, you just want to talk. We love to talk.
Yeah.
I can always promise that I love to talk, and probably Sari will also love to talk. I just want to. There would be so many things to bring up, but I just want to end with the fact that many of the people, of the family members or other loved ones, are living with a secret. So they can't share the fact that their loved one is in prison, or they're only a very small number of people. They can't discuss the feelings the concerns that they have around that issue, the fears that they have. And it kind of eats you up inside when you live with a secret for a long time. So I think it's important to understand that perspective as well when you're working with either people in prison or their family members.
Well, I've written down, shame does not rehabilitate, and that is the message I will take away from this conversation and hopefully apply in other work. So, Sari, Anastasia, thank you very much. It's been fascinating, and I hope we managed to explain and do justice to the work that you're doing. And we'll post this up as a podcast and as a video on YouTube as well, so that if anybody wants to follow it on, then they can do. But thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice. To find out more, go to our website at criminaljusticenetwork.net or follow us on Twitter at INTCJ Network.